Hello, I'm Jerry Baker, editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. You can read my columns every week, which I hope you do, in the journal. And you can listen to these and other conversations that I have with leading figures in the world of politics, business, and economics and elsewhere. This time, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Rahm Emanuel, someone you'll all know extremely well, a man who's held some of the leading positions in American politics over the last 3 decades and is possibly maybe throwing his hat into the ring for the biggest position of them all, President of the United States. So, Rahm, welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let me get straight into that then.
Yeah.
Since I set it up like that, do you expect to be a candidate for president in 2028?
I'm obviously evaluating it. I'm touring the country, talking to people. Most importantly, also having them respond to what I think is the pressing issues. And I think, there's a angst out there and a desire to get back on our A game, which we've actually, in my view, gotten off. And I think one of the exciting parts for me, 2028, both for the Democratic Party and for the country, will be the first election in almost 2 decades that's really about the future. And if you look back, both MAGA, Build Back Better, was retrospective, not prospective. And I think the country in their bones know, and the public knows, that we are off kilter and not taking care of business. I think I have what I think both from a plan idea about addressing the fact that the American dream is unaffordable and inaccessible, to the core issue also that we have failed on our education and responsibilities. And I say this, Jerry, I learned a tremendous amount about Japan when I was ambassador, tremendous amount about the Indo-Pacific, but I learned a lot about America being away from America for 3 years, seeing it from a distance. And nothing China does today scares me. It's what we are not doing for ourselves that scares me. China doesn't decide whether we're comfortable with only half our kids reading at grade level. We decide, and we decide what to do about it. China is not the country that's decided to have an energy production capacity and distribution that's meager compared to what they're doing or what the world is. We decide that. China doesn't decide. We decide whether we're going to declare war on the great research universities throughout the developed world here in the United States. So to me, we're not taking care of business. And if I think I have something that nobody else has to offer, and it's kind of what I call both the honesty and the authenticity and the candor about it and the strength to get things done.
Let's talk about your party, because again, as I said at the beginning, you've been very much a leading figure, and I want to get onto some of the roles you've had, as well as talking about some of the specific policies you're talking about. Over the last 30 years, you've served each of the last 3 Democratic presidents in very important roles, and of course, you've been a Democratic member of Congress too, and a Democratic mayor of a major city. So you really, some ways you're almost kind of you're as close as anybody has been to the very top of the Democratic Party over the last 30 years. The Democratic Party is not held in very high esteem right now. President Trump's approval ratings are low. The Republican Party's approval ratings are low, but sort of in a kind of a race to the bottom, it looks like the Democrats seem to be held in even lower esteem.
We earned it we earned it the old-fashioned way. So don't complain.
So what's wrong? Why again, at a time when people are unhappy with the direction of the country, I looked at a poll this morning, 60% of Americans say the country's on the wrong track. We've got a Republican president, we've got a Republican House and a Republican Senate. Why aren't people running towards the Democrats?
So let's separate 2 things. They are running towards the Democrats, but more because it's good. This election, which like every, not just midterm, but when one party controls both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, it will be a referendum on President Trump and the Republicans. And if you look at every election since 2024, the average number is right now, Democrats are outperforming 2024 by 17%. That's the average. In some places, far higher than that. So it is a referendum on them, etc. Now, 2026 is a referendum election. 2028 is a choice election. Totally different matrix, totally different expectation, totally different. It's a choice, and we have to be prepared for that choice. Look, to the core point why we're in this position is because when people have their backs against the wall on a host of issues, not just economic, they expect the Democratic Party to show up and help. And we were not showing up. We did not show up in 2021. For 2 years, we just kept telling them they were wrong. Here's really what's happening in a macro 10,000 feet, when in their daily lives, they weren't experiencing that. So at one level, we came off massively tone deaf. 2, and another set of issues, we allowed the election to get sidetracked and our party's profile to get sidetracked on a whole set of issues that were secondary at best to the American people when their primary concerns seemed secondary to us, whether that's on the cultural space, et cetera. And then third, to me, the example of this, Kamala Harris actually, when she was talking about owning a home, talking about affordability, talking about how people were trying to make ends meet, she went up 1.5 points over Trump, or 3 points over Trump. So, and from a deficit of 8 when she got handed the baton, clearly zeroing in, she was becoming a change agent on the very subject people wanted to change on. 2, I don't know who did this, but after the debate, she starts to adopt Joe Biden's message about democracies on the ballot and goes on to lose by 1.5 points. Now, I'm not saying, and my take on this is, the moment the American dream becomes unaffordable, Jerry, is exactly when our democracy becomes unstable. And if you want to talk about democracy, talk about home ownership. You want to talk about democracy, talk about the fact that healthcare costs are the leading cause of bankruptcy. But we got off into look, my guess is we got off into a discussion that probably won in a landslide at the Aspen Institute and the Brookings Institute and did really bad in Battle Creek. Okay, so
right.
The reason people are down is because we didn't show up when the fire alarm got hit. We were off doing our own thing as if that was central. It's important. It's just not central to the battle the American people were feeling at that point.
Democrats would take issue with you and say, well, actually, everything they said about Donald Trump, everything they said about the threat to democracy in 2024, it's kind of like, Donald Trump seems to be pretty intent on proving them right. He's weaponizing justice to go after his political enemies. He's, put the military on the streets of American cities. He's doing some pretty kind of wild things with foreign policy. He's attacking the chairman of the Federal Reserve and sort of trying to, undermine the Fed. And a lot of Democrats surely are looking for someone who's going to say, we're going to stand. We really got to stand up to this. I understand, of course, bread and butter issues like healthcare and education and cost of living and all those things are really important. But they say, look, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were right in 2024 to say that democracy was on the ballot. But you don't agree with that?
I'm actually slightly agreeing, but disagreeing. So let me say it this way, and maybe I should draw a sharper knife. I thought I was clear, which is one. I'm not saying the analysis was wrong. This is not how you win an election. Okay, you got to win an election. That's what elections are about.
Right.
And it's not about just being right. It's being right when you actually have control of the gavel. Okay, or you have control of the microphone. I'm not one having had my name on the ballot 6 times and never lost. I'm not one for moral victory speeches on election night. The analysis is correct. No debate about it. But does it win an election? Because in the end of the day, you got to get control of that microphone and you got to get control of that gavel. That's how the score is kept. Those are the rules of a democracy. So the analysis and critique of the threat is absolutely right. But, people woke up after, the midterms and said, oh, look, it's affordability. Well, no, all of us knew that. No, you talked about it. And I really think, and I would say this from not only the distance, but then talking to people, you have kids, parents worked hard, play by the rules, save for college. Their kids go to college, they come out, learn, making 4 or 5 times what their parents made when they started. And yet they're living in the basement and their parents afforded their own house. I mean, I keep coming back to this statistic. The average age of first-time home ownership in America now is 40. A decade ago, it was in the high 20s. In 1950, 50% of the people under the age of 30 were married and owned a home. Today, it's 12%. That's the angst. Everything else is secondary to that. Yeah. And understanding that in your bones and then communicating what you're going to do about it and the fiber in which you're going to attack it every day. Now, I've worked for 3 presidents, 2 of them on the domestic side as chief of staff and senior advisor. The distance between the Oval Office, the Resolute decks, and the kitchen table, President Clinton always used to say, you never allow that distance to get too big. And he was taking, obviously, metaphorically. And we allowed that distance to become way too big. And President Clinton and President Obama were able to not only communicate, but to do it in different ways. President Obama used to make sure that we always had 10 letters for him from people around the country that wrote to him that was reflecting what they were thinking, what they were hoping for, what they were against. President Clinton, I think, had an instinct for this, but always traveled out of the Oval Office and went. And we got away from what is our A game. And one of the things I'm trying to bring to this is, and I can just tell you by way of example, one issue, and I can see it across the country. I have challenged to ban all kids ages 16 and younger from having social media apps. We have lost the control of our adolescents to an algorithm. That algorithm is raising kids. And as I said this in this one meeting, town hall in Mississippi, does anybody know somebody that wishes their child would spend more time on the telephone screen, not less? Yeah. And we have lost control, and they want somebody to show up and be able to take their muscle and push back against, in this case, big tech from what they're doing to our kids.
Well, let's talk about that then in
Sure.
detail. I've got five daughters, as you know, and I'm certainly in the camp of those who don't think they need to spend more time on social media. But what do you do? I mean, I know you've expressed support for Australia just last month that's introduced this ban, 16 years and under, on people that, they can see social media, but they can't have accounts. What are the practicalities? Do seem pretty significant here: legal, constitutional, technological practicalities. How do you do it?
One, since I announced that, France is now looking at it. Spain is looking at it. Norway. Not that would warm your heart, but other countries are looking at it because it's also not only our kids, but I think it has a political impact. And I say this, and I want to repeat this: these media tech companies, and they're media tech companies, make money dividing people. They don't make money teaching the people the words to Kumbaya. That's one. So it has beyond the children, it has a societal damaging quality. Two, it's turning over to kids to an algorithm rather than to the influence of a Jerry Baker or Rahm Emanuel or our spouses as we try to raise them. Three, I'm going to draw a page out of my background. I battled big tobacco. My mother is addicted to it. And we saw all three boys, her life. You could tell when my mother wasn't smoking because she gained weight. When she started smoking again, she lost weight. And she battled with this, etc. As mayor, we implemented the toughest regulations and prices around tobacco. Couldn't sell tobacco product within 500 feet of a school door. Other types of, without going through it. Our teen smoking rates collapsed. The resources I got from raising rates, we put back into free eye and dental care for poor kids. 90,000 of them. Now, it took a constant effort because once we kind of pushed down on teen smoking, I had to deal with, all the other kind of vaping and other types of things. And we were the first city to regulate that. And the reason I say this is you're not going to be done, Jerry, one and done. It's not. This is a marathon in which you press down on the system to protect our kids. Now, the same issue, I think it was 8th bill for President Obama, which is around marketing to kids. President Obama signed it. It was around tobacco. The same issues of constitutionality, civil liberties, etc., came up. And at the end of the day, they withstood the constitutional crisis. Now, 2 weeks ago, I know this is the Wall Street Journal, but the Washington Post had a very good story from the documents of Instagram of how they last year said, we're going to target kids to beat TikTok, and we're going to go after teens. I could have taken TikTok out and said Marlboro and Camel, and it would have been the same documents. So this is going to take time. B, they're doing exactly what the big tobacco companies did, which is focus on our kids and use it as a marketing strategy and then get them hooked. And it's going to require the government to come back, push back, and create a buffer zone to protect our youth and our adolescents. And I'm not saying it's going to be done overnight. If you want instant gratification, find another issue.
You want to push in that direction rather than necessarily. Again, I mean, the examples you've given, which are interesting ones, tobacco, they were achieved by taxes, right? By dramatically increasing the cost. So it could be something like that rather than an outright ban?
Well, no. We also put it behind the counter. You couldn't get to it. You just couldn't take it off the shelf. There was a whole series of steps you had to do. And it took, going back from starting, you couldn't smoke on an airplane, to smoke-free zones, etc., and it was creating a smaller and smaller pace. Now, look, it's going to take a similar effort if you agree, and I'm now speaking to Jerry Baker, the father, that these algorithms are taking over your child's life. And that's what I think, and leading to depression, suicide, other types of very dangerous self-inflicting wounds to children. And they don't care about your child. They don't. They want, that is a pure business model transaction. And that's what it is. And my kids, and I'm going to speak for the Baker kids now, are not up for sale. The only time I disagreed with President Obama, and I said it publicly, and this is when I'm mayor, the city of Chicago was the first city, major city, before any other municipality or any other state attorney general sued pharmaceutical industry over opiates. Sylvia Matthews, Secretary of HHS, they made a ruling allowing doctors, it was a ruling in a sense of in favor of permitting the medical profession to market and sell opiates to adolescents. And I said, there was a book I had read, and I gave it actually to President Obama. And I said, you don't understand what's going on out here. This was in the height of sexual assaults on campuses, were the issue needed to be talked about. I said, there is a cancer going on here. And it was a policy book an alderman had given me. I read it, and it really, in 2014. But so it became the basis of this lawsuit. So it was a history of whether you're going to stand up for kids and understand whether it's big tobacco, pharmaceutical industry, or big tech, where they need a counterweight. Otherwise, your kids are up for sale and you have no very minimal influence on them.
All right, let's talk about another issue I know that you've been focusing hard on, because you've just said, I know you've just been down south, you've been in Mississippi, looking at what has been called the Mississippi Miracle, which is education. I mean, education is obviously, if we're on this topic of issues that matter to people and how the Democratic Party, or indeed any politician, should be looking to policies that actually solve our problems. Mississippi is fascinating, other states down there too. Dramatic improvement in scores, in its core scores for its students. Tell us a bit about what your experience down there, and what you think the lessons are, and what you might be able to do with those lessons. What we might be able to do with those lessons nationally, in terms of, because education, we know, is a huge problem in this country. Too many kids are not getting a good education. What are the lessons you've drawn from what you've seen in Mississippi?
So first and foremost, when you look at it, they call it the Mississippi Miracle. One of the lessons I come out of there here is Mississippi Marathon. They've been at it for almost now 2 decades. They went from 49th to 9th. For all those that have debated, that's not true, here's what Mississippi. Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama adopted the same program and have seen similar rise in scores. It's fundamentals. Retrain all the teachers around the science of teaching phonics. Give them constant support and training to do it, so it's not a one and done. Dedicate a minimum amount of time. I think the state, it's around an hour and 15 minutes, could be more, but more time on task for the kids. Catch early on the kids. If they're falling behind, get them a tutor to support their effort. And that's it in a nutshell. And they have shown in Mississippi, no school could opt out. This was mandated. They passed it statewide. This was required. And that's the core of it. And it does show, in my view, that when it comes to reading and math scores, we're in a Sputnik-like moment. We're competing against the Chinese with one arm tied behind our back. We don't have a kid or a child to waste in this race with a country 3 times our size. 50% of our kids are failing at grade level reading. It's really dramatic. And I grew up in politics, Jerry, when you had President Bill Clinton, Governor Winter of Mississippi, Governor Riley of South Carolina, Governor Hunt of North Carolina, Governor Zell Miller of Georgia, Governor Childs of Florida. There were titans on the education battle. I was a mayor when Mayor Bloomberg was mayor and Mayor Menino. There were others on leading the charge, and Villa Rosa in LA, leading the charge on educational excellence and reform. I mean, you know more about the president's position on windmills than you do know what he thinks of our national reading scores. And to me, people have walked away from their responsibilities to the next generation of America. One other thing I saw down there is that they saw massive significant gains on reading scores. And there's also, I left out of that, an accountability piece, which is if you didn't go, you didn't get social promotion. You go to fourth grade if you couldn't do third grade reading. So there's a consequence to not meeting those standards. Lastly, they saw the momentum begin to kind of taper off. And the Barksdales, who funded this, the CEO for that created Netscape, are now setting up reading clinics to keep that momentum in fourth, fifth, and the onward years. So you don't just hit the third grade bell and then start to taper off. And so I give them a lot of credit for using data, using science, influencing teaching and the support, and then making sure that if you find something that needs constant improvement, doing it. So, and the good news is, I would just say this one point, which is get pre-K through eighth grade back to the fundamentals. Stop all this hokey pokey stuff.
Okay, but again, you probably guess where this is coming from.
How much of
an obstacle to these kind of reforms are the teachers' unions? I don't know enough about the
I
specific
give you
politics.
Credit. It only took you 22 minutes. That's a new record at the Wall Street Journal.
But Rahm, you're not. I'm not alone on this. I suspect you have some sympathy with this view, which is that look. I'm not. As I was going to say, I'm not deeply familiar with the politics of. But I don't imagine that the legislators of Mississippi and Alabama depend heavily on funding from teachers' unions to help them win their political campaigns, right?
Well,
but that is the case in many other states, many other parts of the country.
Let me say one thing. The people that are pushing this, I mean, the other person that took me around was Brandon Presley, was the Democratic nominee for governor in Mississippi. They're quite proud of it, bipartisan. So look, on this big podcast, there's only one of us who stood up and taken a strike from the teachers, okay?
That is true. I want to ask you about that.
Okay,
yeah.
And B, during that strike, had teachers holding signs outside his own sons and daughters' classroom saying your dad's a jerk, etc. My kids wanted to grab those signs and say, we agree, but...
Yeah, just for those who aren't familiar, we're talking about here, obviously, when you were mayor of Chicago.
Yeah, so look, you're not going to get from here to there without the teachers. I talked to a lot of teachers in Mississippi. They actually appreciated the support, meaning being retrained, constantly retrained, and they get coaches and the principals like that. So they bought into it. And you can't make these massive changes if, quote unquote, the workforce is not also part of it. Now, I went to a school in Hattiesburg in Mississippi. One person that's left off of this debate, I happen to be a principal there, and I saw it when I was mayor of Chicago. You give me an A-plus principal, and I'll give you an A-plus school. They know how to build an esprit de corps, support teachers. They're great third base coaches. They know whose strengths, weaknesses, etc., and how to support them. The teachers are the only, not the only, outside of the parents and outside of the principal, the teachers are a big implementer of one of the most significant gains you're going to make. Getting their buy-in is important. Put aside the union leadership. The teachers I met in Mississippi were excited about what they had. And I don't think given it was kind of a, roll up on the side. I was not getting a Potemkin village, especially in Hattiesburg, and not also in the high school I saw, it was 7th grade to high school in Water Valley, Mississippi, other side of the state. So can they be a problem? I battled it. Yes, they can be a problem. When I ran for mayor, Chicago had the shortest school day and the shortest school year in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. Then we had no kindergarten. And the first time I said, what are we fighting about? This is a 5-hour and 15-minute day. This is insane. Now we created full day kindergarten, full day pre-K. We added an hour and 15 minutes to every day, most of any place. I said, I can't believe I'm fighting about this. I'm trying to get kids to spend more time with excellent teachers, but they got to have the support, and their buy-in is important. They can't, but let me say this. When you're at 50% of your kids not reading at grade level, no is not the answer. The status quo is failing. Bring a seat up, roll up your sleeves, tell me what you want to do. I got an answer. It's happening in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and in Tennessee. You got something that can beat that? Show it to me. I've just said states. In Indian River County in Florida, adopted the same thing, same results. So it's a proven model. If you have something that compete with 4 states of showing this, give it to me. If not, this is the road forward, because if 50% kids failing, failure is not an option.
Red state, red state, red state, red state is
Oh.
what I'd say. I would say to you, but look, I mean, no, but you're preaching to the choir here, Rahm. You're talking to the Wall Street Journal opinion pages about education reform. Is this a message, though, that resonates with the Wall Street Journal editorial pages? Is it a message that's going to resonate with the Democratic primary establishment?
Yeah, you have parents.
You're going to be able to take that to them?
Yes. 3 things I would say. First of all, I believe it will. Bill Clinton's proof of that. He ran on some of the education reform. President Obama ran on Race to the Top and his ideas. Look at his first book about dealing with, quote unquote, teachers' unions. Look at his book. He says it in there. So do I think so? Yes. And guess what? If you want somebody that's going to husband their political capital and let kids wallow in failure, I'm not your guy. Don't vote for me. I don't care. I just know we're in a crucial moment. We're at this Sputnik moment. Nobody in China is taking and accepting academic failure as okay. We shouldn't either. Chinese kids are not more valuable than American kids. And do I think it will? I do, because I've seen it all across the country. I've seen it in my time, and I know how not only education, protecting our kids from big tech, I know how this resonates, and it should resonate, because parents are doing everything. They're doing everything they can to make sure their kids stay on the right track, don't fall off with the wrong crowd, and they know that that classroom is the ticket to a better life.
All right, let's talk about you personally. We've not got that much time left, but I want to talk about you, the person, as it were. One of the things that's, and this is illustrating this, I think these issues that you're raising here illustrates this. There's a view of you which is that you're a winner. You said it yourself. You've won repeated campaigns, and that's what your focus is on winning. And by the way, there's a lot of virtue in winning, because if you don't win, you don't get things done.
Yeah.
But the criticism is that it's all about winning, and that in the end, actually, you've got to have some core principles, and you've got to really, really, believe in these things, and you've got to really passionately argue for these things. It's not in the end just about, finding the policies that are going to give you the 50% plus one. How do you answer to that? That maybe, through your career, where's the continuous strand of principle in your career?
Well, first of all, if all I cared about winning, there's a lot of fights I would not have taken on. My life would be better and easier. My kids' life would be better if I never took on the education battle in the city of Chicago. It would have been easier. I never walked away from it. It's been the guy that was negotiated for President Obama, the race to the top. So it's been a constant. Now, in a prior part of my life, not only did I create kindergarten and universal full-day pre-K in the city of Chicago, I was going to be an early childhood educator and a child psychologist. That's what I studied. My dad was a pediatrician. This has been whatever you want to say, from both schooling, protecting from big tech, protecting from big pharmaceutical industry. This has been a constant in my life. And it's been a constant from the day I was 10 years old. I used to go on rounds with my dad and see, as a pediatrician, him take care of kids from all over, all walks of life in the city of Chicago. And so people can say what they want. And I do believe in winning, because everything else is commentary. Without winning, without getting that gavel. Now, the other piece is, when I was President Clinton's senior advisor, 96 to 97, passed the minimum wage. When I was caucus chair, we passed the minimum wage. Last time it was passed in Congress, I was the caucus chair, 2007. When I was mayor, I passed the minimum wage. Going back also, first city in America, you got to be average in high school. I make community college free. So preparing people for the future has been a constant in my life. And I know the benefits I've had from a mother that was a leader in civil rights, a father that was a leader as a pediatrician who came to this country with not a bucket to spit in or a window to throw it out of, and that we had a responsibility to do something with our lives. So I make no bones about winning. I know why I win. I know who I am, what I've done. And as I've always said to my kids, what is leadership? Knowing why you're doing what you're doing, and then having the strength and the will to get it done. Just having an idea is not good enough, and just being powerful is not good enough. They're heads and tails of the same coin. And look, People will make their judgment. That's okay with me. I know who I am. I know what I have fought on my whole life. There are fights that other people who took on the assault weapon ban in the Brady bill that President Clinton asked to take on. You're looking at them. Who was responsible for taking on the insurance companies to get 10 million kids free their health care? You're looking at. Who took on big tobacco when he was mayor of the city of Chicago, give free eye and dental care to kids, 90,000 of them, right here. Who took on the healthcare industry and the financial industry to get both financial reform and healthcare? You're looking at them. That has been the story of my life, taking on big, powerful interests where I think the scales are tipped and rebalancing them. Now, I know who the critics are, but they talk. I put points on the board. It's a big difference.
You've talked about Bill Clinton a lot, and you've talked about the other presidents you've worked for too. And you talk about, Bill Clinton, managed to campaign on the kind of things that you're talking about, won 30 plus years ago. How did the Democratic Party get so far away from some of those positions? Now, you're probably going to push back on that a little bit, but let me take some of these issues.
I'm not going to push back. I do think they've walked away from it. Yeah.
All right. So take, for example, immigration. You worked in the Obama. You were President Obama's White House chief of staff. President Obama was, famously and indeed was criticized by the left for being, the deporter in chief. Right. I mean, that was an aggressive, by any measure, an aggressive campaign to deport illegal immigrant, an effective one too. I don't know what the number is, 3 million plus or whatever. I then remember the 2020 Democratic primary debate where every single Democratic candidate basically put their hand up when asked, would they
free
support
healthcare at the border,
free healthcare for illegal immigrants? And then we saw the Biden administration actually more or less make good on that immigration, open border immigration policy. We saw that, and then we don't need to get in too much into detail into the sort of the far left kind of progressive ideas on trans and things like that. What my broad question though is, how did the Democratic Party get so far away in such a short period of time down these sort of far left rabbit holes? And is it really in a mood? Is it in a condition to get back out of them and to support someone like you who wants to take them in a different direction?
So one thing, you're right. As Chief of Staff, President Obama used to get protested at events as deporter in chief. When I was senior advisor of President Clinton, helped design Operation Gatekeeper at San Diego, Operation Safeguard in Nogales, Arizona, and I was criticized many times for being too tough on immigration, doing the work for the two presidents I worked for. Now look, I believe firmly in a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws, and any reforms which need to happen should be consistent with those two principles that define America. Now, if you notice, President Clinton gets very attacked by voices in the Democratic Party, and my response always was it the peace or the prosperity? Which one did you hate most? Because incomes grew faster under President Clinton than any other time. And the criticism of President Obama was he was too tepid. He did financial reform, universal health care that had waited 100 years to happen. He gets it done. Takes the country from a near depressed, small D depression and gets it out of there. Took longer, wasn't an instant. And the harshest criticisms of both President Clinton and Obama come within the party, not from outside. In fact, if anything, Republicans grudgingly admire both of those gentlemen who not only win, but win re-election, admire their political and policy chops. It is the Democrats that have been the harshest critic of those two. And to me, Bill Clinton wins election after a 12-year run of Ronald Reagan and wins re-election, the first since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, leaves America economically, militarily, politically, and strategically across the globe and at home more united and better prepared for the future. And there are voices in the party that will say, oh, he was too timid, or B, he sold us out here, etc. Just wait, in fact, when he walked out of office, there were 300,000 more manufacturing jobs in America than when he walked in. Now, President Obama on the other side gets criticized as being tepid, small bore, he never went for the long ball, etc. Let me tell you something. Big and bold can also be bad. Big and bold don't make it good. Now, I happen to think the ACA healthcare plan is big and bold. I happen to think major financial reform after the scandal is bold. But elements of our party. Now, I do think interesting, Democrats are hungry in the country for that. The Washington chattering Democrats who are swiveling their little Chablis or walking around with their Yeti bottle cups wouldn't know how to win if their life depended on it. And the good news is, going back to your first question, Democrats may have a low esteem of the Democratic Party, but they're showing up in droves for the election, mainly driven by their anger at both what President Trump's doing and that he's getting away with it. But they're not waiting for the leadership out of Washington to set this right and rebalance things. And I think the party going forward in 2028 will understand what it takes to win. I want a big party, not just that brings the left and the center or moderate, however, whatever labels you want. I want them together, working together on raising the minimum wage, free community college for those that get a B average, people doing what we're supposed to do in early childhood, making sure that people can afford their first home. I want independence in the party because independence is the fastest growing party in America. Their home should be with us. We have more agreement. And I happen to think, this is one we haven't even got to economics. Right now, the rest of us are caught between Marxist and monopolist. Neither one are good for the economic growth. I want this country back on a growth strategy, creating jobs, creating incomes, and most importantly, creating opportunities. And I'm telling you right now, the strategy between monopolists and the strategies by some others in the party, and not my party, they don't understand economic growth. And you've got to have that. And I don't think the president and his party understand growth.
Well, I was going to say, the President Trump is doing a good job of being both a Marxist and a monopolist from what we can see from some of his policies.
Yeah, he is. One of the problems we have, and I'll just say this as a general swipe without getting into all rewriting the tax bill. Our system, both legally and politically and economically, is really drafted towards economic wealth preservation, not economic wealth creation. And getting back to the creation of wealth is the core goal because it creates opportunity. And we're not there. The tax code is about preserving wealth, not creating wealth.
But since we're on economics, and I do want to do this, and you mentioned Marxist, so can't, I'm here in New York City. I can't where we have a socialist. We're now in the grip of socialist control. Yeah. But a democratic socialist, true. But that again seems to be kind of where the party, where the party's voters do. Now I know you can talk about those more important. I've no doubt you will say off-year elections that we had in Virginia and New Jersey, where a Marxist Democrat did not get elected, but a more of a mainstream Democrat. But that does seem where a lot of the energy is in the party, where people are. We saw this in 2020 to some extent with Bernie Sanders. We still see this, and again, and on the right, Donald Trump with his kind of populism and calling for Bernie Sanders type policies like imposing restrictions on credit card interest rates or telling companies what they should be doing. There does seem to be a kind of there's not a lot of enthusiasm for capitalism anywhere at the moment in this country, and especially in the Democratic Party.
So let me back off one counterpoint. And I met with Mayor Mamdani when he was mayor-elect. Look, he gets 50% of the vote. New Jersey had a primary. You had 5 candidates: the mayor of Newark, the mayor of Jersey City, the president of the teachers union, and 2 members of Congress. The 2 members of Congress who are both moderate and or conservative take 50% of the vote. In politics, Jerry, sometimes you got to know sound is not always fury. Sometimes it's just sound. Now, is the progressives a part of the party? Yes. And is it, in this case, I think left? I would just say to you, take 2 big decisions Mayor Mamdani made. Kept the police chief and said on day 1, I'm going to keep mayoral control of schools. Big decisions, schools and safety. Big decisions went mainstream, not left on this side. Second, let me say something bigger on this. Energy on the progressive or energy on the Donald Trump. There is an angst out there. There's an angst about the fact that we're not taking care of business. And there's an angst, appropriately, that everything that people worked for is falling and literally slipping through their fingers. And that their kids, and think about your generation, think about your own kids, but think about what your parents, you never thought that you were going to fail. Your goal was to when you said do better, it was actually against your parents' benchmark. That feeling that no matter what you do, you're going to stay in your parents' basement. No matter how hard you work, where you go, you're never actually, until the age of 40, getting your first start on what is both materially and psychologically your ticket of freedom, which is your own home. That is creating angst. And more importantly, Washington and other places are not paying attention or taking a priority. And I kind of said this, President of the United States is all focused on Venezuela. What about Virginia? He was talking about Greenland. How about the price of groceries? You know more about what he wants to pay for Greenland than you do what he knows. I bet you he doesn't know what the price of eggs, milk, and butter and bread is. And that's a problem because they don't expect it to be solved overnight, but they want you to be focused on it every night. And it's not. And it's really, there's a desperation there that's legitimate. That's why people are grasping at places that, to be honest, not that they're not a believer in the free market or the capitalist system, but you can't deny the fact that it is not working for enough people. And you have to look back, even going, as I say, in praise to President Clinton, etc. The last 25 years, if we were honest and looking at it, the ladder has been pulled up on home ownership, saving for retirement, the affordability of a college education, and not being one illness away from the poorhouse. That has happened. And the whole system, as long as our kids were okay, we weren't happy with it, but it kept going. And after 25 years, the American people have jacked the factory floor and said, this ain't going on till my kids are valued as much as somebody else's kids. And they have every right to do it because their backs are against the wall. And if you don't feel it, then you don't really know what's going on in their lives.
Quick couple of questions before we go, because we're almost out of time. Firstly, a foreign policy question. Again, perhaps an inevitable one. You are a proud Zionist. You're Jewish, proudly Jewish. You've been staunchly Zionist. Now, I know you've been very critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu. You can talk about that if you like. But is that where the Democratic Party is right now? We've seen this again, this sort of energy among younger Democratic voters post October 7th. We saw this, we should call them Democratic voters, but among young people on the left who see, and I've seen there's a lot of polling, as you know, Rahm, which says that the Democratic Party, which was staunchly Zionist and staunchly pro-Israel, is much, much less pro-Israel, much less Zionist than it was. Is that something if you do run, you're going to push back against?
Let me do the 5 things. One, in 2009, Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly attacked me as a self-hating Jew.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And writes very critically of me in his book. And it was all over housing in the West Bank. I didn't need a war to know this was going to be a problem. Number 2, Israel has never been more strategically secure and more politically vulnerable. And I knew then, if you look at the history of Israel, there have been 3 attempts on the political front for peace. 1, Egypt, Jordan, and the Abraham Accords. They have worked and withstood a lot of pressure, but those peace agreements make Israel more secure. 2, Israel goes unilateral out of Lebanon, unilateral out of Gaza, and you get Hezbollah and Hamas on the north and south of Israel. Unilateral doesn't work. Number 3, they tried divorce from the West Bank. I can give you all the reasons they did that, etc. There's some legitimate to it. The fact is, neither one of the last 2 have worked for Israel. There will never be a river to the sea, and there will never be a greater Israel. The quicker people get to the understanding of living side by side, and that means no teaching about and paying for the rewards for killing Jews and teaching kids to hate Jews. But it also means not pushing people out of the lands that their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents had. And I disagreed with what the prime minister was doing. And unlike others who waited for a war to get to it, I told it to his face. That's what strength is. When you're wrong, you're wrong. Now, you cite a statistic. I would tell you it's a under 30 and under. It's not a party thing. This is both parties. And I was opposed to what the prime minister did when he made Israel a partisan political issue going back to 2015 in the speech in the Congress without talking to the executive branch. Unheard of. Disrespect for President Obama. Number 2, the 6-day war was a formidable definition of Israel. This too, contrary to what the prime minister thinks, will be a definitional war to Israel. And I think he had conducted not just the war, but more importantly, I do think the way he conducted the war, because Israel was no more secure with 70,000 dead versus 30,000. How you could get in the hostages, and where there's a whole host of things that we don't have time for. And I think the prime minister, as I said, Israel is more secure today than it's ever been in the 70-plus year history, but more strategically, politically vulnerable. That's on him. And I'll be honest about it. Now, I think you have a democracy. I still believe that Israel is a democratic friend in the Middle East. We're better to have that friend, more shared values than otherwise. But I won't hold back from my criticism of a prime minister who I think both politically, economically, strategically has made our number one ally more vulnerable. And let me say this also, then, in a bigger point. There are places where America's national security interests and regional interests don't align lockstep with Israel. And I have no problem saying that.
Final question, and it's in two parts, if you don't mind, and I'd like an answer. I'd like an answer to both parts. As I said at the beginning,
I'll say yes and no, and then you decide which one it goes.
It's not a yes/no question, I'm afraid, Rahm. You're going to have to be more creative than that. As we said at the beginning, I mean, you've held over 30-plus year career in politics. You have really held some of the highest public offices in the land. You've been a senior advisor at the White House. You've been a member of Congress, including running a congressional campaign. You've been chief of staff, White House chief of staff. You've been a mayor of one of America's largest, most important cities. You've been ambassador to U.S. ambassador to one of the most important countries in the world. So your two-part question is this: one, what are you most proud of in that record of public service? And two, more importantly, and you're not going to escape this one, what's the biggest mistake you made?
Can I get two? Well, okay. One.
If you give me two that you're proud of, you have to give me two mistakes.
Well, okay. They kind of go together. But first, I walked in. I ran for office saying safe streets, strong schools, stable finances. I walked out of office with that. When I walked in, the schools were rated by William Bennett as the single worst in America. When I walked out, Sean Reardon, the leading education demographer at Stanford, called it the single best public school system of the top 100. I walked in one way, walked out the other way. Now, that also goes with one mistake, and this gets to a core question. And I've said this before, I made a major mistake. The mayor of the city of Chicago, I was living on the last year of an 8-year contract. Rich Daley did 8 years. They had a 4% raise. The finances were a disaster, but Daley did not do his last school budget. And I unilaterally pulled the 4% pay. And I created a problem that befuddled my first term. That was on me. Because I should have went to Karen Lewis, the head of the union, and said, okay, we have a financial problem. What do you want to do? She could have said, you ran for office, that's on you. I'm not going to help you on this. But I never gave her the chance to say that. And I created a context that made my job, a hard job, harder. That's on me. That was a mistake. I think this is a personal thing. It won't really matter, but I think it does. It does matter to me. You just gave the titles of all my jobs. President Clinton, senior advisor, 7 years. 6 years in Congress, 2 years chief of staff, 8 years mayor, 3 years ambassador. Never hired a lawyer for anything I did wrong. I'm proud of what I've done in the sense, Chicago, #1 city for 7 years, corporate relocations and direct foreign investment. #1 in America for 7 years straight. Proud of what we did on schools, proud that we initiated things like free community college, you got to be average, brought education added for you. I can go through it.
That is says a lot about the state of our politics. That is quite an achievement, I guess. Right? That's not many people in that position. Well, Rahm Emanuel, I wish we could talk longer, but from White House advisor to ambassador to Japan and via chief of staff, member of Congress, mayor of Chicago. Thank you very much, and maybe with perhaps one more act on your resume still to come.
Yeah, we'll see. Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Rahm. Thanks very much for joining us.